Why Mathematics is Not Science by Francis T.S. Narrated by Warren Schlueter. Mathematics is created by humans. It does not need to obey the laws of nature as science does, for which mathematics does not physically exist, but is virtual. Science is a part of nature. It must obey the laws of nature. Although science is approximated, it cannot be created. Nevertheless, technological sciences are created, yet they must obey the fundamental principles of science, of which all the fundamental principles must be discovered within the laws of nature, from which mathematics permits paradoxes, while in science they are not allowed. It is because every physical consequence can only happen once, which cannot be repeated. What is mathematics? From a scientist's standpoint, mathematics is a sequential, symbolic, substituted language, like our written or spoken languages. But it does not need to obey the laws of nature, since they were virtually created by humans, but not physically discovered. For example, a set of equations as given by A equals B, or A minus B equals 0, and 0 equals B minus A. From a mathematical point of view, they are the same equation. Similarly, given a principle of a function of time is the cosine of omega t, where omega is a radiant frequency and t is a time variable. Notice that this assumed equation has no time limitation on it. It can be used within our time-space. The reason mathematics does not need to obey laws of nature, since it is not part of nature. And like science, which is part of a physical reality, which cannot escape the laws of nature. For this we see that it is terribly wrong for mathematically oriented physicists to treat mathematics as science. What is science? Since science is a part of nature, it must obey the laws of nature. So what are the laws of nature? Since our universe is an energy conservation dynamic subspace, there are laws of time, a law of energy conservation, law of thermodynamics, law of entropy are a few examples, from which any fundamental principle cannot simply violate any of these laws. Let me further stress that these laws of nature were discovered, but not created. Referring to the preceding slide, the interpretation of an equation from a physically reality standpoint is very different from a mathematical viewpoint. For example, A equals B is interpreted as a conservative equation in a physical standpoint, while A minus B equals 0 or 0 equals B minus A are zero-sum equations as from the energy conservation standpoint, in which f of t equals cosine of omega t is not obeying a law of temporal, that is t greater than 0. It is not a physically realizable equation that can be applied within our time space. Although mathematics is not science, yet science needs mathematics, since scientific principles can easily be described by simple mathematical equations, by which mathematics is not science, but science cannot be dissociated from mathematics. This must be the reason why our modern physics was hijacked by mathematically oriented physicists. What are the laws of nature? To understand the laws of nature, firstly, we must know how our universe was created. Since it is impossible to understand exactly how our universe was created, but there is a closest to truth model by current reliable knowledge of the physics that can be used in the name of physical realizable paradigm, reference 1. However, it is a big mistake to use a created space-time continuum that violates the laws of nature, reference 2. So what are all the existed laws of nature that we already have? Those must be the law of temporal, that is t greater than 0, time, law of energy conservation, for example, the first law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, that is the second law of thermodynamics, and others. For example, Einstein's four-dimensional space-time continuum is a created model that violates all the laws of nature. This shows that any principle developed from Einstein's space-time model is doomed to be false, even though its mathematical representation is correct, from which we see that it is not how rigorous and correct the mathematics you use, it is the right paradigm used that will give us a physically correct principle. Reference 1 is a book by Francis T.S, The Nature of Temporal Science, a Physically Realizable Principle. Reference 2 is a book by Albert Einstein's Relativity, the Special and General Theory. The law of temporal, that is t greater than 0. Since our universe is an energy-conserved dynamic subspace in which it obeys the law of temporal t greater than 0, that is causality. For example, take mass to energy equivalent equation as given by delta E is 1/2 delta mc squared, which shows that an amount of energy delta E increases. It's coming from an equivalent amount of mass delta M annihilated. But it is a timeless equation without the intervention of time. It has no way for the conversion, for which delta M must already exist within a space with time. In this, one of the examples shows that physical substance cannot be existed within an empty space, that is a timeless t equals 0. And this is one of the most important laws of nature, since our universe, our living space-time, cannot be empty. Or simply call it the temporal exclusive principle, from which it needs an expenditure of time, delta t, that is a section of time, to make the mass to energy conversion happen. That is a law of nature. For this, without imposition by temporal t greater than 0, just from a mathematical interpretation, can be justified that mathematics is science. Furthermore, from mass and energy equivalent equation, we cannot even tell it is a mass to energy or energy to mass conversion unless the equation is imposed, but the law of temporal, t greater than 0, is the one cannot be violated. Application of mathematics to science. Since science needs simple mathematical descriptions to facilitate the complexity of science, in view of limited ancient civilization, it would be a surprise if Chinese characters were selected to develop mathematics, for which Arabic, Greek, as well as English alphabets were used in mathematics. From a scientist's point of view, mathematics is a symbolic substituted language. This is precisely why mathematics were mostly developed by Westerners. And this is one of the reasons why science needs mathematics, but mathematics does not need science. This must be the reason why our fundamental science was hijacked by mathematic-oriented physicists, since science is overly dependent on mathematics, for which scores of mathematic-oriented physicists have treated mathematics as science, but inadvertently, physical, realizable science has been ignored. Fault of mathematical physics. Nevertheless, the fault of modern physics is rooted by the created zero-summed space-time paradigm of Einstein. This must be the reason why his space-time paradigm has never been challenged. Although you may not accept our universe as an energy conservation dynamic subspace, but surely it is not a zero-sum space-time of Einstein. For example, no matter how fast that you can travel, you would never be able to see your own grave. Since practically all the fundamental principles were created by mathematically oriented physicists in which they regarded mathematics as science, this trend has led us in the wood of mathematics, if not for decades, must be over a century. Since the fault is due to mathematically oriented physicists, since they knew our modern science is so irrational, yet they have opted to promote it. Nevertheless, each discovery depends on a physically realizable platform, that is, laws of nature. In the following, I will show by imposing laws of nature, realizable science could be found, which means that mathematics cannot be science by itself, since it does not need to obey laws of nature. What is a zero-sum universe? Although knowing that modern physics is irrational, mathematically oriented physicists continually relied on mathematics for solution. Figure 1 depicts a zero-summed space-time model from a mathematics viewpoint, where a function f of positions x, y, and z in time equals alpha t. It represents a one-dimensional spacetime as a function of time, and alpha is an arbitrary constant. Figure 1 shows a one-dimensional spacetime within a zero-summed universe model for positive time and negative time. In view of the preceding diagram, we see that space changes with time. Its symmetric negative space, that is f of minus x minus y minus z and minus d, started from t coming from negative infinity to t equals 0, and then to positive space all the way to t approaching infinity. Nevertheless, if we accepted our universe model as it is, In principle, all the space-times in the time domain are existed as from a blindly mathematical interpretation. This is virtually the same as a well-accepted model that antimatterers are existed within our current universe, since all the past spacetimes are still there, yet we are in the current spacetime. This is exactly the reason, without imposition of laws of nature, that mathematics alone can wrongly interpret a principle. An energy conservative universe. First, let me take a mass to energy equivalent equation as given by E equals 1/2 mc squared, which is a non-zero summed equation. Similarly, it can be rewritten by delta E equals 1/2 delta mc squared, which shows that an amount of energy delta E increase is due to an equivalent amount of mass delta M annihilated. But it needs an expenditure of time, delta T, to make it happen. That's the law of nature, from which, without an imposition of time, a mathematical expression can hardly justify as science. Yet, as from a mathematical standpoint, this equation can be equivalently written by a set of zero-summed forms. E minus 1/2 mc squared equals 0, or 0 equals 1/2 mc squared minus E. These show there is a symmetry exchangeable property among energy and mass, but this formulation has misled us to interpret that our universe was created by a zero-summed empty space paradigm instead of by an energy conservative dynamic subspace, reference 3. Since empty and non-empty are mutually exclusive, our universe cannot allow any empty timeless subspace to exist. Reference 3 is a book by Francis T.S, The Origin of Temporal T greater than 0 Universe. Nevertheless, mathematics is not science. Firstly, we must understand how our universe was created, by which a question for you is that what is the distance between yourself and yesterday of you? If you knew the answer, you may have seen the idea how our living time-space was created, from which you may see mathematics itself as a tool which cannot be treated as science by itself alone. This is exactly why mathematically oriented physicists have done to our fundamental physics, since they treat mathematics as science. As can be seen, if one imposes the law of temporal, t greater than 0, one may find ways to tell if a principle is either science or not. For example, by imposing a law of temporal on cosine of omega t as a physically realizable principle, on which a function cosine of omega t for t greater than 0 equation is a temporal principle. Similarly, without the imposition law of temporal on Schrödinger's eigenwave equation, his superposition principle has created a worldwide quantum conspiracy, since quantum scientists have literally treated his non-existent superposition principle as physically real. Nevertheless, mathematics itself is a usable tool, but alone by itself cannot be a science, from which we see that no matter how rigorous mathematics is, it should not be treated as science, but a viable tool for mathematical physicists. Dirac antimatter hypothesis. As another example, take the Dirac equation as given by reference 4. That is the quantity of I delta minus m times psi of x equals 0. Since it is a zero-summed equation, it indicates that anti-energy and anti-mass exist within our time space. But those antimatters or anti-energy were supposed to have been existed in a negative time of our universe. Then how can Dirac justify simultaneously of antimatters within our current space-time? For which we see that without the imposition of the law of temporal, any solution developed based on Dirac equation cannot be physically legitimized. Nevertheless, the Dirac equation takes a non-zero-summed form, that is, the quantity of I delta equals m quantity times psi of x. Then this antimatter postulation may not be hypothesized, from which without the imposition law of temporal, even using rigorous mathematics cannot save his equation, from which we see that it is the physical realizable platform that warrants a physical realizable equation, but not by mathematics alone. Reference 4, article by Hirschfeld, to supersymmetry direct equation. Feynman's quantum electrodynamics. Regardless of the complexity of Feynman's QED analysis, all his QED solutions are doomed to be false and fictitious as mathematics are. If one imposes a law of temporal, that is t greater than 0, one can easily show that all his QED solutions are virtual, as mathematics are, and even fake. This is a very interesting topic that I have left in part for you to fill in. Nevertheless, the fault is mostly due to us, since we are accustomed to be good followers. Although he had warned us, as I quote, after we had learned quantum mechanics, we simply do not understand quantum mechanics, end quote. In which you see that Feynman himself was also one of the faithful followers. Yet after all these years, we are still relying on pure mathematics to answer our science needs. This is like searching in the woods of mathematics for a physical realizable principle, but the physical realizable principles are waiting for us to discover in the land of temporal universe, t greater than 0. This is precisely what mathematically oriented physicists have misled us for decades or for over a century. But the irony is that without being equipped with mathematics, physicists have no tool for them to discover. A paradox of a great theory. Nevertheless, it is mathematics that Einstein used to discover his legendary relativity theory as depicted in Figure 2. We see that without mathematics it is impossible for him to develop his theory, in which two sets of light beams are synchronously bouncing back and forth between two sets of mirrors. One set is stationary, and the other is moving away at a constant speed of v from the stationary set. If we equip two clocks A and B respectively within each set, mathematically we have found clock A runs faster than clock B if we stay on the moving platform of B. On the other hand, if we stay with the stationary platform A, we will discover clock B moves slower than clock A. Notice that this is a classic textbook material, but we have shown Einstein's relativity theory is dead wrong, and why do we keep promoting it? Figure 2 shows a classic textbook mathematics physics example. On a pure mathematical platform. In view of the depicted Figure 3, it is very likely mathematically oriented physicists would agree that the apple is falling, but inadvertently they have violated their own mathematical principle, since mathematically speaking, the apple is either falling or our planet is moving up, as based on Einstein's relativity postulation. So my question is this: would a mathematically oriented physicist stick with the theory that he has learned, or opted toward a physically realizable science, from which we see that without any restraint by laws of nature, for example, temporal t greater than 0, just depending on mathematics alone is not adequate to resolve the reality issue of science? As a scientist, mathematics is a tool which should be used for a new discovery, but again, mathematics alone cannot alleviate the fundamental problems of physics. In view of the work of Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, reference 4, they blamed it as mathematically incomplete instead of a violation of the law of temporal, that is, t greater than 0. Reference 4 is Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen. Can quantum mechanical descriptions of physical reality be considered complete? Mathematics moves a wave. An electromagnetic wave propagation equation is given by that shown in the slide, which mathematically assumes a radiating electromagnetic wave traveling within a space of an electromagnetic medium. This equation shows an EM wave is moving within a space filled with a permittivity substance. Yet my question is this: does the wave move with the time of the medium, or the time of the space move the wave? Since mathematically, that is, the equation, indicates that it can be both ways, yet physical reality has only one choice. T greater than 0 within our consideration, the answer becomes apparent. This shows that mathematics alone cannot fulfill the name of science. Yet it is a virtual device. Without it, theoretical physicists go nowhere. But pure mathematics cannot be accepted as science as from a scientist's standpoint. Conclusion. In conclusion, I have made a distinction between fundamental science and mathematics. Fundamental sciences are meant to discover the laws of nature, which cannot be created by humans, while mathematics is created by humans, from which it is wrong to treat mathematics as science, as from a scientist's standpoint. Yet science needs mathematics to describe its fundamental laws, and this is exactly why science was hijacked by mathematically oriented physicists for decades or even centuries. In view of the currently dominated mathematical physics, we see that catastrophic damages have been done. But this is about time for us to look for a viable, physical, realizable science. Otherwise, we'll be forever trapped within a fantasy mathematical physics, which will be more damaging than beneficial to our science and to our humanity. Since trillions of research revenues have been wasted to principles that cannot even exist within our space-time. To those who spent decades or even a lifetime on this non-existent physics, my sympathy cannot shadow my disappointment, because they have never even shown any attempt to correct it, instead openly keep promoting it. Thank you. Mathematics is a tool to discover science, but itself alone is not science. I show an equation. Mathematics is not science, but science is mathematics. Fundamental science was lost in the woods of virtual mathematics, but I found it in a temporal, t greater than 0, space, promised land.